He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're heading home, my home of Vancouver Island, where a lot of unexplainable things have been taking place. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, as well as our Patreon, where we get ad-free early episodes available there. And should you wish to reach us directly, you can via our email at cryptidclues@gmail.com. Now, without further ado, let's get into this. Now, Vancouver Island, it has dozens of people that have gone missing over the years. Police investigations are dating back as far as 1978. Now, in these cases, investigations don't actually get listed as a cold case until the missing persons are located. Now, as time progresses, we know technology gets better and certain examinations of evidence get more refined. So the cases are under constant review. But regarding Vancouver Island, these last few years have seen a significant increase in missing people, especially children. Now, I was raised on Vancouver Island, and it's got a sentimental home-based feeling for me, like anyone else when they're home. Growing up, I used to go hunting and hiking out in the Horn Lake area. Coincidentally enough, we recently explored the Horn Lake Caves just last year, but I digress. The woods on Vancouver Island are massive. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, an island? How big can that be? For example, I know this won't paint a proper visualization for you, but bear with me. For example, there's a mountain on Vancouver Island, and you hike to the top. It's called Mount Benson. You can see the ocean on one side, Departure Bay and everything. And when you turn around and look behind you, you would think, oh, you'll see the other side of the island. You see ocean. Not a chance. It's mountains upon mountains. This is a big island. All you can see is these forests and mountains going on for miles. So a little bit more about Vancouver Island. It's located in the Pacific Ocean and a part of the British Columbian province of Canada. It sits comfortably along the Pacific Northwest. The island itself is 456 kilometers in length and 100 kilometers at its widest point. The island's population was about 864,860 as of 2021, with nearly half of that population actually living in and around the Victoria area. So Victoria, that's down to the southernmost part of the island. Victoria is actually the capital of British Columbia. The other large cities on the island are Nanaimo, Port Alberni, Parksville, Courtenay, Campbell River, and Tofino is definitely up there. It's definitely a much smaller town. Definitely nowhere near big in scale as Victoria or Nanaimo, anything like that. I've been to most of these cities. I was from Nanaimo originally, but I've been to Victoria and Parksville, and you kind of stick to your kind of hub where that's the city there. So Vancouver Island. Now, this is something that's always deterred me because I'm afraid of earthquakes. And sure enough, we're going to be hit with a mega quake on Vancouver Island someday. Maybe that's another conspiracy in itself, but I think it's going to happen. And this is because Vancouver Island is mostly made up of volcanic and sedimentary rock. And around 55 million years ago, a microplate called the Cuillin Oceanic Plate was subducted below the North American continental margin. Now, this caused extreme warping and ultimately the western edge of North America. Now, at this point in time, the Cuillin Plate is fully subjected beneath Vancouver Island, along with the remnants of the Farallon and Juan de Fuca plates. This result is a very prominent, seismically active region. And probably, I think it's one of the most active regions, seismically speaking, in all of Canada. Now, along with the mountain ranges and the forests, there's just a wonderful variety of wildlife. It's worth noting, however, that the island actually does not harbor all types of animals that you might think are very common in Canada. While the mainland holds many of these, you will not find such animals like mountain goats, moose, coyotes, porcupines, skunks, chipmunks, many other small mammals on the island at all. It's worth saying as well that grizzly bears are also absent from Vancouver Island. However, black bears are everywhere. Now, here's the kicker. Grizzly bears have been seen swimming between the islands in the ocean everywhere. Bear that in mind for later. Pun very much intended. So we have a wonderfully rich area for cryptids to thrive in. We do know that Sasquatch resides on the island. In fact, this really pains me that I don't recall most of the information of this gentleman at the time. But it was well over a decade ago. I was still very, very young, and my mom would take me out to a Sasquatch presentation in Parksville. And it pains me that I can't recall this gentleman's name, because I would love to follow up with him now that I've really taken this more to heart and just running with this passion of cryptids, because he presented an awesome small presentation of photographs and just information about Sasquatch, all from like locally out behind Mount Benson. So how he would put it was that he would go way beyond the logging service roads, and he would basically take these photographs of massive Sasquatch footprints that were found in the snow. He would use a handheld knife placed next to them for scale, and you could see like they were extremely long. And he also talked about clairvoyance, which is, again, the ability to use an enhanced sensory method to perceive things. And it was this ability that allowed him to view several family groups, as he described, both young and adult Sasquatch trekking out in the woods. Mind you, these woods are not always easy to traverse and get into, so like any forest, when something fortifies itself out there in the deep wood, it's quite easy to stay hidden. One thing that I'll always remember is that when he tried to get closer on foot, these things would consistently just keep this a minimum distance so that he couldn't actually get close to see them, but they always knew where he was. So this is when he employed this extrasensory clairvoyant ability to try and see a little bit more than what he could with being in the present situation. Now, on top of staying hidden, this is also associated with my previous pun of the bears. But when you have chains of islands, all abundant in resources and food, why wouldn't creatures like Sasquatch swim in between islands as the grizzlies do? Many people are proven to be safe in their encounters while out in the water and observing Sasquatch on the shoreline. Note that that's not really a lack of swimming experience on Bigfoot's part. These things are very capable being in the water just as much as they are on land. I have no doubt. Now, I did an episode before on some of Vancouver Island's cave systems, along with the Harrison Hot Spring Sasquatch, so I won't go into depth too much at all. But the island has thousands of caves and is rich in underground networks that have yet to be explored. So we have yet again another powerful reinforcement piece of evidence to support the notion of cryptids like Bigfoot and people going missing on Vancouver Island in the Pacific Northwest. Now, before we get into some other encounters here, there's an individual that I want to try to have guests on the show. So until then, I'll keep this insight very, very brief. But the baseline is that the more north you go on Vancouver Island, the more remote and isolated things become, of course. So this individual, sure enough, wanted to go out and explore this very remote, beautiful inlet on the western side of Vancouver Island. Very far north past Tofino, it's accessible via float plane. Now, this took place back in the summer of 2014, and it was to be an entire month-long stay in this remote cabin. With satellite radio installed in the top part of the cabin, that became their saving grace later, because for this individual, things really turned sideways. It wasn't long until they began hearing rocks or boulders being thrown around the distance. They'd stand on the porch and it sounded like just smashing way, way out there. As nighttime crept closer, so did the rock sounds. Near midnight, this is when it hit. Loud stomping started. And not just from one, but multiple bipedal beings roaming around the outside of the cabin. Vocalizations. Now, these audible outbursts, to the person's interpretation, they deduce that you don't belong, leave. Now, this wasn't obviously English speaking, but this is the notion and the feeling that they felt at this time. And sure enough, that's just what the person did. They called out on the satellite phone, and the next day, the seaplane flew in and retrieved them. They even left things behind without a care of bringing back all their gear with them. They just wanted to get away because of these things. Now, it's worth noting as well that when he was leaving, in these situations, you don't want to fess up and say, oh, Bigfoot. You don't want anyone to look at you differently or just associate you with crazy. However, the pilot was the one who instigated Bigfoot first, and it caught this person off guard. So it's a very, very well-known factor now in this general area that people are familiar with Sasquatch. But with that, let's jump to our first ad break and then get into some more encounters and details. And we're back. So, looking at some more Vancouver Island Sasquatch stories. Once again, the western and especially northern sides of Vancouver Island are filled with sightings and occurrences. All of these creatures, now, particularly in an area called Alert Bay, there's locals that were reporting strange screams and howls coming from the nearby forests surrounding town. Now, it's speculated to be a Sasquatch. There have been a few residents that claim to have seen things and have things thrown at them, but the vocalization specifically, that's what's really been swooping over this area. Now, being in these areas, you definitely start to recognize the calls of different animals and become familiar with it. This is one call and audio that is something that the locals were not able to really figure out, hence the deduction of Sasquatch. So having these different possible animal culprits and just kind of being familiar with it, particularly in this area of the island, we have to remember no bears, cougars, or deer. And for the time being, however, let's entertain the idea that this is a Sasquatch. These vocalizations, as of late, have not been heard for a while. And that does make me wonder if government agency has interference or something taken place. But when these sounds started, they were happening multiple times over the course of years in this general area. Now, again, that's just one area among a plethora of other communities up and down Vancouver Island. Another incident I want to focus on, however, is actually one that was published in a video report by CTV News. Now, this is basically a Canadian British Columbia news network. And if you know me and you've listened before, you are very much aware of how I hate when news anchors get all sly and output this little smirk. It looks like locals nearby experiencing a Bigfoot in the community. Maybe they have found evidence to prove it's really out there. It's just a whole bunch of hocus pocus. And I feel like it's just annoying. That's exactly the way that they explain it that causes more disbelief in cryptids, especially Sasquatch. But I digress. That is a topic for another day. This encounter is regarding a site where an Fishery officer had an encounter. And also, many footprints were actually found left by the Sasquatch. A gentleman named Luke Swan Sr. went out with a group of others to investigate these footprints. Clocking them in at 16 inches long with a measuring tape, this is going from the big toe all the way to the heel, with a width from toe to toe clocking in at almost 7 to 8 inches long. It was Mr. Swan's son that spotted the Sasquatch here prior. Luke Jr. basically was on patrol, arriving at White Pine Beach, where he then spotted something sitting on a log in this little cove area. But upon arriving, the creature stood up immediately, clocking in around 9 feet tall, Luke says, with very broad shoulders that were very, very prominently shown as the creature turned and was sideways towards the officer. Now, when Luke Swan Sr. arrived, they found over 10 footprints along the shoreline, which they photographed and took measurements of. Unfortunately, soon after, the tide swept away any evidence, of course, but the photographs do justice. They were able to follow the tracks with some difficulty and managed to see more evidence of tree barks actually peel off. And these peelings were well over 8 feet up high in these trees. The tracks continued on into another stream area and eventually disappeared. Now, Luke Swan has seen so much wildlife, and of course, how couldn't he? He's a fisheries officer. He's going up and down the coastline, in and out of little inlets. You're going to be seeing everything. Gosh, the wildlife would be plentiful. But this placement in nature also helps differentiate the bear to Bigfoot notion that so many people like to use as a hoax fuel. Now, moving on from there, this is sort of drifting away, but still relevant to Vancouver Island, particularly the disappearances. There is an individual named Richard Norton. He's a prominent hiker from his time residing in Switzerland, the Alps, and Jura Mountains. He got drawn into the world of hikers going missing when a story was posted about someone vanishing while out on Mount Shasta. Now, we did an episode on Mount Shasta not too long ago, so definitely scroll down our feeds and you can check that one out. This disappearance, however, was in May of 1999. Nothing overly eccentric to this case either. The man and his friends were camping overnight on the mountain, and everything seemed okay when all of a sudden he simply walked around the corner from the camp. Was never seen again. Richard Norton went ahead and created a website called strangeoutdoors.com to catalog these things. Now, again, I'm not affiliated or anything with this website. I'm just shouting it out because I think it's a very valuable resource and awareness tool for hikers. So I think even curious cryptid enthusiasts should indulge in this and really harbor more information. Harbor more information? I don't know if that's the right way to say that. Gather more information. So this website basically acts as a hub and a catalog for people to report disappearances, unexplained events, and even serial killers operating in the wilderness. But the main goal for this website was because of the non-existent government websites that have no records or proper cataloging of disappearances in the United States or in other countries. A website like this is a powerful tool for finding the truth. Now, it's worth mentioning, though, that many of these disappearances featured on the website indeed defy logic, where nobody will be found, but the items all will be, sometimes in multiple spots. And I quote, "Who knows? Portals? Sasquatch? I really don't know. But I guess the universe can be more complex than we first think. Some of the articles I've written drive me crazy trying to explain them in a way that doesn't sound too far out." End quote. Now, this is where it ties back into Vancouver Island. A woman named Sylvia Apps was last seen in July 2014 on Castle Craig Mountain, Vancouver Island, when she was 69 at the time that she went missing, and she was, of course, a well-seasoned hiker. The Comox Police Department claimed she was equipped with the proper navigation and safety equipment, and again, I reiterate, was accustomed to long solo hikes. The Comox Valley Search and Rescue, composed of 19 different search teams, all from around British Columbia, assisted in this search. Now, they were actually able to find Sylvia's blue backpack. This was containing everything except her hiking poles and camera. Those items, however, were discovered in an entirely different location. So Richard Norton followed this case in great detail and eventually categorized it as strange. To this day, Sylvia's remains have yet to be found. There is still a plethora of cases on Vancouver Island, and this is just one of many. There is good news, though. In early 2018, legislation was passed for a national missing persons DNA data bank intended to assist missing persons and unidentified remains of investigations. It was named Lindsay's Law, and this is basically to honor the disappearance of Lindsay Nichols, who at the age of 14 went missing in July of 1993. Now, she was walking along the Royston Road in Comox Valley. Unfortunately, the Comox Valley region alone of Vancouver Island has been subject to a few dozen missing persons cases. So what is this? Is this the handiwork of a cryptid? Is it a serial killer? Someone just getting lost in the woods? Portals? Underground cave networks? I'm flabbergasted is what this answer could really be. And will we ever figure it out? I can't tell you that. I am curious though what you think. Let us know in the comments, because this Comox area is definitely a hotspot for vanishes. And something on Vancouver Island, something that I never thought was really there the whole time I lived on the island, is that there's something going on. And having a lack of specific species allows you to really hone in and properly categorize things. You don't have grizzlies. Grizzlies would have been the biggest thing. There are cougars. I've come very close to a cougar while driving. on Vancouver Island, but the bear comparison, very, very powerful in the Bigfoot community. For people dismissing it, of course. And if you don't have grizzly bears on this island, then what's standing 9 feet tall? And that's not just one incident, but many incidents where people are reporting these and people just dismiss them as bears. But I mean, you can sure as heck tell the difference between a black bear and a grizzly bear. Size, color. So when you see something brown standing 9 feet tall, you're not going to think that's a black bear. And it makes me wonder how many more dismissed sightings are there out there on Vancouver Island. I bet there's a lot. And with that, I'm going to end this episode off. I hope you have a great Monday today. Me and Reuben should be back next week, getting back into the swing of the new year. Again, we got a whole lineup of awesome shows coming your way, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And until next time, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, and our Patreon where we get ad-free early episodes. And should you want to reach us directly, you can via our email, cryptidclues@gmail.com. So until next time, everybody, take care and stay safe.